Hi there. If all things are working, I have a live stream going. And it does appear as if I do have a live stream going, so yay, go me. We are fussing around with the controls a little bit, but nothing wrong with that, I suppose. And you know what? I am going to hide concurrent versions. Pear first. Hey, Pear. And see if I can pop out the chat and only look at that. The stream will automatically stop when I'm no longer talking. I also set it to live chat so I can see everything. And yeah, hey, this is another Monday coding stream. And I have been doing some things that should help with that. For instance, right now I have a setup where so now what I can do is run the audio of my dev computer through the HDMI cable. So I'm going to stop that for the moment. But yeah, now without too much trouble, I can run audio through. So that is definitely a plus. I'm fiddling with the controls a little bit, so the stream looks a little bit more vivid than it did. And I've got my cup of coffee, a bottle of water. I am ready to do the coding stream of writing another plugin or two, or whatever comes to mind, and or answering questions. So you gotta speak up in live chat because I can see that, but otherwise I'm just going to dive in and start coding. Yeah, not yesterday, last week, I had so much of that going on that I barely got any coding done, although it didn't get in the way of me catching up with some of my stuff. I have Wait out now, and there's a few other ones, such as Slusonic that people spotted last week, and Console 8 Lite that are ready to come out. So I'm starting to build up my little buffer, and that's a quality of life thing that is worth having. Don't think I need text wrangler open, wrangler. So what shall we do? I've got a couple of ideas. One of them is, I make my notes on pieces of paper. One of them was stripping out just the vibrato from Galactic and possibly enhancing that, making it a quadrature vibrato, except for it will be a tridrature vibrato, because I was thinking about having 3 separate vibrato taps, 1 hard left, 1 hard right, and 1 in the middle. It seemed to me like that might be kind of cool. Hey, Stephen K. That is a possibility. Another possibility is Galactic 2, because it's definitely something where I could bring the stuff that I added to Verbity 2 and adapt that to the Galactic format, which is a sort of different style of deep reverb. I don't remember whether I have the delay parameters working real differently. But what I do know is that I could have the, how we went from 4,000 echo returns to 9 million echo returns with about twice the processing, which is pretty cool when you can do it. It's the geometry of how the topology of it is adapted together. I've also got notes on reverbs, but that's probably going to be more relevant in the event of I've kind of quietly decided to myself that if I can get up to some Patreon goals, I'm going to try to start duplicating Bricasti reverbs, and that would involve getting one. Now the problem there is they're freaking expensive. I'm currently running a Mediverb. It's cool. It's okay, but it's really bottom of the line compared to a Bricasti. But it would be a business expense, and it would also be exciting to me. Like, one of the things that I'm probably going to need to do in one of these streams, maybe fairly soon, it feels like I should do this, is Aaron, the ones that are listed on the screen there are planned for me to make, and that's also what I'm talking about. Aaron. The deal with the ASR 10, I bought a rather desirable sampling keyboard. My problem with that is like what you can see over your shoulder in my funky lighting design where, here I'll let you see that one. I'm not coding yet. The deal with me buying an expensive sampling keyboard is my music is made with like guitars and drums and basses in the modular synthesizer. It's not just a blinking lights thing for the background, cool though it is at that. But when I finally put out an album, Welcome to Free Luna, it was heavily based on using that synth. And it proved to be inspiring to me. That's also why I'm excited about doing VCV Rack going forward, because that's a way in which I can make the modular synth experience available to people in general. But I had been talking about getting like a SP1200, a really old vintage sampler, and people were very excited about that because I do have the capacity of getting retro sound hardware stuff and getting fairly close to the sounds of those things, but in the box. I've done that fairly well with Macity. Another thing I have in mind is I have a concept of being able to study mixing boards like my Heritage Audio, which I'd like to be using more, and running test signals into there so that I can really nail down the sound of this thing and then make a console version that is a letter rather than a number. The console versions starting with a number have been just getting the concepts together. Console version starting with a letter is going to be my emulation of a hardware device. And so it would be I could run test signals into my little Mackie mixer, and I got a Mackie 1202, which is actually pretty desirable for some genres of music. And the idea would be figuring out how to study that. Hey Mel, figuring out how to study that little Mackie so that I can start with the Macity tones and channels and stuff, but also work out what kind of console system best emulates the way that stuff combines in there. And that I think would be kind of useful, especially since if you have a in-the-box Macity 1202, it has as many channels as you want. And all of them have that tiny Mackie sound, which is not what you'd call audiophile. But synthesizer folks often like that a lot. A lot of the drum and bass folks enjoy it. And of course, that the tiniest of Mackies is the French house sound. So you can really get mileage out of that. And what I've done with Console 8, including what you saw in the, I have no idea whether you sent me mail. Sometimes mail doesn't get through to me, and depending upon what kind of mail it is, it can, I don't know exactly how to put this. Like we've had guys like the Muzzle, for instance, uh, old school Airwindows fans, remember? Um, and I would almost call this fellow a friend of mine, although I've never met him. But he would go into manic phases and offer me millions of suggestions. And my conditions under that are like, you can make suggestions and write me millions of letters as long as you accept the fact that I'm busy and don't answer them. If you're cool with that, then by all means carry on. And there's somebody who's been doing that also, who isn't David Bexley. But it works kind of like that. Like the way that you engage depends on what kind of output you get out of me. And it's always going to be an essentially positive output because I don't generally mind people being who they are. But I don't know whether I have read your mail. It depends upon how recently you've sent it. I have kept up with my inbox this morning, but I don't know. Anyways, one thing that we could do is get into one of these plugin ideas, and I'm almost tempted because I want to do a couple 3 hours today and force myself to stop afterwards just so that I don't burn myself out. I get caught up in these things and extremely carried away. But my goal with getting back into the Airwindows thing the way that I used to do it years back was oh yeah, well I am delighted to be a distraction for you. I'm not going to go for 27 hours here, but back in the day I was able to put out a plugin and then also do a live stream coding stream like every week without fail, and I enjoy being able to do that for people. It was also, I was doing that while at the same time I was like writing fan fiction novels, and I was able to do all of those things and it was fine. I was able to like go to fandom cons and all of that and it was fine. And then I decided that I needed to make the live streams be music and have lots of people be paying attention. And I beat myself against that rock until I couldn't go further anymore. And, got involved with somebody who lives in another country and did a bunch of things that led to me not being able to continue doing the base level of engagement that I was doing. But having gotten through a bunch of that, I am doing my level best to put stuff back together to where it is extremely sustainable. And that's why it's 11:20 according to this laptop screen. And I'm going to go to like, I don't know, 1 or 2 or something. Oh, Stephen. And one of the nice things about this is that I get to read chat because that's part of it. And I'd like to see that. No controls that sound sculptures of bus color slider into console for proper processing. Huh. The one thing I like about that is the idea of the no controls plugin, because I like doing things that are single. Like if you're selecting different stuff, I don't see why you can't select them from the plugin selection menu rather than have a plugin that you open and it has all the things in it. Ironically, that's what the rack plugin is a plugin where all the things are in it. But when I'm doing little standalone ones, I like them to be very low overhead. I have not, like the most recent version of bus colors, you could kind of do that. And the reason there hasn't been more versions of bus colors is the only thing I could really add to it would be ultrasonic filtering. But, and also I don't have a convenient way of getting new samples, and I'm not really excited about even dynamic convolution as far as getting tones. I prefer doing stuff that is more algorithmic in design, because I don't think you get the analog tones from like taking digital processing and then also putting a layer of analog reverb on top of it. Yeah, it kind of you can get stuff that way, but it's not my chosen. Like, put it this way. If you heard what I was doing on the video for Wait, and that is music that has not come out, and I got some work to do on that before. I'm probably going to drop as a single because I don't think I can continue that across an entire album and have it be finished. It'll probably be a single, and I'll need to do albums that are more, synthesis and more just my personal stuff. But I do think I have a single on my hands, and I need to put vocals on. And that's going to be its own kind of challenge. There's no way I'd be able to live stream that at this time of my life. But what you were hearing was 2 tracks of drums, 1 track of guitar, 1 track of bass. I may or may not have had like a shaker in there. I don't remember whether it's muted or not in the final result. But Console 8 Lite, which is how I got those sounds, is not a convolution impulse-based thing. It's the algorithmic thing that I focus on, and it's also somewhat minimalist and somewhat not. It's doing a lot of things that are like what analog circuits would do, and it turns out that's important. But it's not adding unnecessary color. It's really minimal as far as that's concerned. Hey, Naldo. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I don't need all that much, as far as the stuff that I've talked about off and on and stuff. One thing that you should remember is if you're going to get romantically involved, pick good people. Then if it goes terribly wrong, they're still good people. And you move on as best you can. I don't know how to put it better than that. Make choices where you don't have to have regrets, other than that you didn't, the situation didn't work out. But that's why I would say I appreciate the peace and strength. I'm not in desperate trouble because I have no shame, because there was nothing wrong with what I tried to do. It's a pity that it didn't work, but it was a big ask the whole way through, and I picked one of the best, smartest people I've ever met, and so it was a damn good try. On that note, let's switch over to coding. I don't want to dive into that. That's a little more personal than I'd like to be. I feel like Airwindows works best when I sort of leave the personal out of it fairly often, unless absolutely necessary. Let's do one of my moonshots. This piece of paper, which you can't see because I'm not focused on it, says sine, cosine gives point, cosine, sine gives position of next position from previous. I'm trying to write a sine wave generator that I can use for a concept I'm calling orbit kick. So what we're going to do is fire up Xcode, go for a new project, and audio unit effect, which is a template that I use. It's available on my GitHub. And I select not with CocoaView because with CocoaView is what in this context gives me a stereo plugin. And I want the AU to be a mono plugin. And I'm going to call it Orbit Kick. And create the product. A real guitar DI box plugin. I think that depends, because it's like, if you have a DI box, that's what you've got. That would depend upon what more do you wish. Because what you might want to do is get something that has high impedance inputs and use that, at which point you would have a real guitar DI box. And why would there be a plugin? You've already got the guitar DI box. Generally, if you're looking for something to change that, you're looking for a different kind of effect that's pretending to be something other than a DI box. The DI box is ideally going to be pretty clean. I mean, I'm using them with my own stuff. It's my DIs are nice. I appreciate them. But some of the things that you get with nice DIs, like using an API pre or whatever in your situation, some of that you're not going to get if you take like your Behringer, $50 input, and you run into that, and what you've lost going through the really cheap interface, you don't add coloration to have what the other thing gave, because what the other thing gave was a range of clarity, dynamics in every sense of the word, both in loudness but also in ability to resolve really subtle things. Sonority, which has to do with the loudness versus subtle things. And once you lose that by going through cheap electronics, you don't get it back by adding colorations. This is why I don't gravitate towards the bus colors or whatever. That is strictly adding colorations and taking away some of the sonority that you get from having simple processing. So I would say reframe your idea as far as what you're trying to make happen with the guitar DI box idea. Anywho, I've got my code here with my default template stuff. It's all of these controls in here. And we're going to create a variable. Or two, because we're probably not going to need the other one, but it will help as far as me explaining what I'm doing. So we've got two variables, and let's give another one. I'm trying to think of what I want to call it, because ooh, Stephen, that's an interesting point. Stephen observes, can you take a low impedance input, plug a high impedance thing into, which will end up incredibly dull and weak, and then fake what you would have gotten with the high impedance input? And the answer is generally no, that's not how that works. I don't think there's a good way to algorithmically work around impedance mismatches, because what's happening is you're losing a lot that can't just be reformulated. And Guitar Conditioner is in fact losing stuff. Guitar Conditioner is losing slew. It is losing some low frequencies through a high pass, and convolution is overlaying blurs of sound on top of stuff, and these things are already what happens to you when you're plugging your high impedance instrument into a low impedance input, is you're not getting what you were originally going to get. So basically what you want to do, whether in an expensive way or a cheap way, honestly I think stuff like, I don't know, your cheap Behringers or whatever, slightly more expensive, you can go with Focusrite, and slightly more expensive than that, you can go with Apogee. It kind of steps upwards, like you can do your Behringer and then you can do your Focusrite. I am quite fond of a bunch of Motu things. I like using those. And you go from there to fancy converters like Lavry's. And each step of the way, you're getting more through into the initial capture. And that's what you go for. Like if you go for your your libraries and your APIs and so on, rather than your $50 Behringer converter. What's happening is you're going to get a sound capture that on the surface appears pretty similar. I have a video out that actually demonstrates all that stuff. It is, I wanted that to be there. Actually spent money buying converters for that purpose. And it's just playing drums over and over again into all these different inputs. And there was no great way for me to be able to play exactly the same, because like I mentioned in the weight video, I can't be a working drummer. I don't have time. I don't have time to get with that or keep in practice. And even if I did, like, I'm not Ginger Baker. Some people are born with a near magical sense of time. That ain't me. I have things that my ears and my sense of music work in their own useful ways, but not to the way that it would make me be potentially a great drummer, even if I exercised as much as he possibly could. And this is fine, but this is also why I have to speed up drum tracks, get into that D and B zone. Anyways, what I was doing before I got distracted onto talking about different kinds of converters is writing a plugin. So I'm just going to call this speed for now. What we're going to be doing is taking a sound and I'm just making a bunch of notes, different kinds of things related to how I'm going to go about doing this. Because my purpose is like this. If you were doing a simulation of, say, for instance, a bouncing ball, you could take the position of that and use it as an audio output. And this is what I'm doing with X and Y here, or what I will be doing. I'm so busy thinking about this that I'm just going to copy this over directly so that I can drop it into reset and then take away all of these instances to double, because I don't need to redefine this variable here. This is where I tell all the variables that they equal 0. That's going to be enough for me to start with. Some of these variables are not going to end up being useful. Now, we've got overall scale. This was from the template I don't need. Don't worry about this because I don't mind if I get errors from you didn't use this control. And we're going to delete this stuff out. Now what we have, and I suppose I can leave dry sample in there as well. In fact, it's possible that I will continue to use dry sample, so we'll leave that in the template as well. Now what we've got is how to deal with high frequencies. I mean, that depends upon what you want to do with electric guitars. High frequencies can be awesome. I use a Telecaster sometimes into an amp, and one of the best things about it is how when you've got string buzz on the Telecaster, I also had to adjust the neck of that one because the neck of my Telecaster is the one that I grew up with. It doesn't look like anything special, and in fact it's not. It's from a Saga Stratocaster guitar kit, and I put 3 on a side tuners in it when I was a kid. That's like getting on towards 40 years ago by now. And I no longer have access to the truss rod. It is carved. It has polypropylene varnish on it, so it is sealed. And if it warps or bends on me, I'm hosed. There's nothing I can do with that instrument any further because I can't fix that. And that's the guitar neck I learned to play on. So I've got it on the Telecaster, and I had to loosen the screws holding it on and put a little shim in to raise the action just a tiny bit because I had the action so low that it was just literally all sitar-like buzz. But on a Telecaster with a weird old microphonic bright tizzy pickup on the bridge, you can put so much high frequencies out of that thing that it distorts really interestingly. So the question of how to deal with high frequencies in electric guitars depends on what's your desired outcome. Give me an example of what tone you want. You could cite a tone from off of a vinyl record that I've got, and I'd probably be able to tell you what it was or how it was done fairly often, like at least half the time probably. I would know how that was done, but you have to tell me. You can't just say how to deal with high frequencies because it's like, to do what with them? Anywho, or XY position speed. If you were doing a model of a bouncing ball or a orbiting thing around gravity, you would be able to read the vertical position of this orbiting thing going around in a circle, and that would give you a sine wave. Like if you've got something whirling on a tether, for instance, and hey, Florian. Very good, very good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm not surprised. A lot of that stuff should work just fine with end-to-end things. That will also mean that the upcoming Console 8 Lite might work just as well. That'll be more of a channels to bus architecture rather than channels to submixes to bus. That's pretty much the only change there. It's just more suited to what I do with these things. So if you have something whirling on a tether, the weight on the end of the tether is going to describe a circle. If you've got something spinning in a circle at a given speed, and you track just the vertical motion, that is a sine wave. And it's useful to use sine waves on things like kick drums, bass frequencies, because they don't have any extra harmonics. So the first thing we're going to do here is take something like, we'll redefine this as increment. I'm going to use position. I'm thinking of what to do now. First thing I can do is simply not update this, but the second thing I can do is make sure that it doesn't crash on me ever. And that's a if statement. And I'm going to trap this two ways. These two vertical bars mean a logical OR. So what I'm doing is if position is less than 0 or position is larger than 4 44,100, position's going to be 0 again. I'm adding to position each time. And this is going to make my variable position just start ramping upwards over and over again. It'll keep becoming a huge number, and then it'll go back down to 0 each time. Classical differential geometry. Yep, there's a number of things getting involved here. So we've got a wet and dry, and we've got a sine. So what this should do, and we can build this and find out what we've got. Just kidding, I already know what we've got. Is, well, firstly, it needs to build itself. Oh, and I need to engage the trigraph. One of the things that annoys me about programming is you're buried in all this funny language. When it says trigraph, question mark, quote ignored, what it means is neither a 2 question marks or a 3 anything trigraph, but this set of 4 things. Orbit, kick, comp, subtype, question. That's what they call a trigraph. It's 4 letters, not 3, so I don't know why it means try. It's not a graph, it's text. But this is what we got to do to get rid of that error. That's what tells the DAW what ID your plugin is. So, or ORBT for what I'm calling orbit kick. And the idea of orbit kick is that you're physically modeling something orbiting gravity. It should have drag, so it will decay to nothing. And then if you read one slice of this orbit, you get a sine out of it. And then it becomes a question of, can you put in irregularities into this orbit? Can you make it decay in speed? Do you only have like one period for orbiting, which means that you would have only one note, or can you make it go faster and then slow it down? If you can make it go faster and then slow it down, you have a decaying sine, and that's what you need for a kick drum. Ooh, I do not know the tone of the song No Surprises by Radiohead, unfortunately, because I'm too old, and that wasn't one of my bands growing up, because they're probably around my age, and they were also listening to the stuff I listened to. But, yeah, like, here's some other possibilities for clean electric guitar that don't sound dirty that I would recognize. Dire Straits, Pink Floyd often gets into those zones. If you can come up with an example from those, I might know how it was done. I sadly do not know how the No Surprises was done, so I can't answer that. And I've made my trigraph, which is not bad. I'm not even an hour in. And now we can compile this. We've got a lot of unused variables, but that doesn't hurt anybody. And we're going to scooch this over to the side for readability purposes. Close that for the moment. Load this up and see what it makes do. Meaning I gotta put my headphones on because we are streaming the results of this. And the only way that I can actually hear it, it's not supposed to be a rotary speaker thing like for bass drum. No. Yeah. I see the ambisonics question. Fair enough. on to attempting a thing. Let's open something. I don't get to open processor torture test because that's a whole bunch of copyrighted music. But this is my drum track. And I can make a sound using that. Now, let's open our new plugin. Recent effects means what I've used, unfortunately, so I gotta go in search of it in my Airwindows menu, and then it'll be a recent effect. Orbit kick. I don't want gain to be high, but 0 is also probably not useful. And we should get a sound. Here's what we get. We have a sine, which can be quite loud. The sine will pop now and then as it resets. It's a very high note, although if I hold the Option key, I can drop it down to what is probably an entirely subsonic frequency at this point. So apologies for blowing your woofers there. Let's change that. It is also a loud sine because the sine function gives you -1 to +1 output. So that, in audio terms, equates to literally 0 dB. So what we've got now is a variable that keeps increasing. And as it increases, it is, we're getting the sine output of it. Gain is giving us the amount that it's increasing, and we do not yet have it so that it's dropping or it's reacting to anything. So that's obviously the next step. We've got our little variables, things like position and speed. We're using position to increment. Increment is this, so let's make it be position. Speed, and then let's do one further thing, and that's going to be and a handy thing about this kind of stuff is that if it'll match parentheses for you sometimes. Yeah, thank you for the praise on Pop 2. It's not magic, it's just an old, it's that algorithmic thing that I was telling you about. Rather than trying to clone the convolution impulse of some hardware device, I'm trying to find the secrets behind how stuff like that moves. For instance, Pop 2 is designed to act as much as possible like my Heritage audio successor. And that is a real life, physically right here, diode bridge compressor in the vein of like some old Neve stuff. Oh, by the way, hang on a second. We're going to take a moment because my fire is getting low, so pivot. So let's put a log on the fire and we'll get back to work. It's one of the things about being a small fish entrepreneur is you're going to sweep your own floors, you're going to carry your own firewood. And big corporate people generally have money to hire people to do this, so they have more free time available to spend on the work that they do. It's been kind of cold out, so we're gonna fire up a bunch of fire. It's what we're gonna do. And off we go. I should keep an eye on it in case there's a damper in here. So if it starts burning enough, it'll be worth closing the damper so it doesn't overheat. But for the time being, it's probably fine. And back we come to and here we are again. I could have given you full screen for that, but it wasn't that important. So what have we just done? We've just said, and my hope is that in doing this kind of thing and talking through it, it slows me down enormously. But if anybody is learning how to program, well, this is to a large extent what it is, and it's on a really basic. I don't know if Heritage Audio would make a coupon for my channel. At any rate, I don't always do that. One of the things that is snuck into the studio is a distressor, so there might be an attempt to get a plugin to act like at least some aspects of the distressor. Because one of the things about the Heritage Audio, if you turn it to full limiting, it acts kind of quirky. A distressor does a much better job of hard limiting and just that brick wall output. The successor, if you try to make it do that, it will sometimes clamp down and silence the output, which is not what you'd necessarily want. It's possible it's not functioning, but it works really well for so many other things that I assume that's just how it's designed to do. Anyways. This is going to make it do stuff. Specifically, speed, and I think I'm going to divide that by like 100. Speed is still the thing that gives us our pitch, but when we say if fab's input sample is larger than speed, speed equals fab's input sample, and I don't need that fab's because speed's going to converge to 0, so negative swings aren't going to affect it. So let's just use only positive swings. Ignore this for the time being, and that'll simplify it a little bit. So now our position is how fast we're moving through this sine wave stuff. But if noises happen, it will accelerate that. And then speed times increment means I can make it drop back to 0 almost instantly. But if I have it at like 1, it will never slow down. And so I'll demonstrate what that does. And the other interesting thing about this is I could also reset position. And that'll do its own interesting thing. But for now, let's just keep it on a big old loop. And we're generating our sine wave thing. Because the sort of basis of this is to start by experiment. The ideal result of this is to make a kick drum synthesis that is the same as, a sine wave oscillator. There are things like twin T resonators in hardware, and that's the kind of stuff that analog things like Roland drum machines, your classic like 808s and so on, activate a sound through a sort of impulse, and then what they've got is a twin T resonator in a feedback loop, so that only one frequency can get unity gain, and you get as close to unity gain as you can, and that means you're making a sound, it transforms into a sine wave which then decays. It's not the same at all as taking like a triangle wave oscillator and making it play a note. Instead, it's very organic. It's almost like an acoustic space, creating a resonant thing that then dies off. What we've got here is going to be, firstly, we're going to want it to be almost all dry because it's going to be weird. Secondly, we want no decay, and I don't think we're doing any, well, we're not using second for that, are we? We're using gain. So we're having notes coming out, and they are not as, I didn't expect it to be this low speed. We also have two separate notes because what I'm actually hearing is two channels being mixed into one, so that's a little confusing. But if I change gain, it's already too effective. Like that dies away so fast you can't even hear anything. Let's put it back to 1. So now we have our notes, but as soon as I put it to 0.999, that whumping noise is the kick decaying, but it's decaying so fast that it's almost nothing. And we also have another problem in that if we decay slowly enough, we're spitting out huge amounts of just low frequencies. It'll drop down into the subsonics and stay there. And we don't really want that. We don't want it to drop down to a DC offset and stay there. That doesn't seem good. So we'll quit out of here again. And one thing about how we were not able to get to a high frequency, that means that speed is not high enough. And when we're using it, we are 10 times faster could be enough. And then it drops back so quickly because speed times increment we'll invert that so that we can work with it more easily. Firstly, actually we can do that all up here. If we make increment be pow get parameter 1 to the power, it's cubed. It's like to the power of itself and then to the power of itself again. Pow 2 is just squared, but 3 is cubed, and so on and so forth. Hey, Brady Kent, you did indeed catch this live. I'm going to be doing this on Mondays, so. And I am answering questions, but I'm also trying to code a new plugin. And I'm going to be doing it until like 1 or 2 or so, and then I'll stop so that I don't like overextend myself too much. And then I'll be developing these things into actual plugins going forwards. But here is a thing that I'm calling OrbitKick, and I'm trying to develop a sort of physical modeling. Now, if I have it be 1.0 minus pow get parameter param1 by, it's most of it is going to be 1 minus a very small number, because taking this and having it be cubed means that fractional things like 0.1 are going to be 0.1 times 0.1 times 0.1, in other words, really small. This is how you put logarithmic tapers into your controls and things like that. Since speed is getting multiplied by increment, if it is literally 1, then it doesn't decay at all. And we had it decaying way too fast, so now we've got it 1 minus, and so rather than setting the param1 to 1 for ultimate sustain, we have it set to 0 for ultimate sustain. And let's play with that again. There's a whole bunch of things we still have to do, but we're playing with this for the time being, just to step-by-step watch how we work through this. And this is how you do the DSP coding thing that people typically want to learn how to do. And we're going to open our drum sound, which is giving us our initial noises. We've got our dry wet. This goes back to 0. And now if we put dry wet up, we start hearing the sine. And it's a high noise. It is actually not... The reason it's chorused is because it's mixing the two channels together into a single input. I don't know why it's doing that, but live with it. Now we have something that's acting kind of like kick drums. But it's not really perfect. For one, it's kind of tracking things in a rather special way. It's actually pretty cool, but it's not what we're after. One of the things I need to do is deal with that subsonic issue. And that's going to get into how this works. So, what we have is input sample equals sine position. But one of the things that I was doing when I started coming up with the idea for this is you don't have to just take the raw output of the sine algorithm and have it be the audio output, because then what you got to do is filter it and stop it from being DC and whatever. And it's not really doing a physics simulation, it's just the output of a math function. If you were doing a physics simulation and you had a circle, here I'm going to bounce back first for a second. If you were doing a physics simulation and you had a circle, you can't really see it, but trust me, this is a circle. And you needed to make the math for having something go around in a circle. The position of the circle is defined by sines and cosines. Like all vertically like this, the bottom of the circle is going to be like sine ends up equaling 1, cosine ends up equaling 0. Then, as you continue going forwards, your variable increases and the angle rotation will start describing other things along the circle, and sine will become slightly less and cosine will start becoming slightly more. It will stop being 0 and it'll start being a larger number until on the side sine has become 0 and cosine has become 1. That it's again the sort of quadrature thing of they work in opposition to each other, so that if you take the sine and the cosine of a single number, it will describe a circle. And it will continue going onwards. The number can just keep increasing, and if you keep reading the sine and cosine, the outputs of those functions are going to continue to describe the circle, orbiting around and around forever. Here's the thing. If you were tracking something like, for instance, orbit x, orbit y, and incrementing that, you would need to go, okay, my position is here on the circle. Exactly what do I need to add to this for the next step of this thing that would give me the next position? Flip sine and cosine around. Then, if your position is at the bottom of the circle and you want to find out what is the next position for your circle, your variables are going to be like orbit x is -1 because it's the bottom of the circle, and orbit y equals 0. And you add the inverted things, the sine and the cosine, so that x winds up being basically the same and y is increased by the full amount of the sine function. If you were halfway around, you basically have math functions that can take an angle and produce the output of this, but they can also give you the direction of your next placement along these lines. And that's what I was thinking of for orbit kick. Because what I wanted was something where you could take a variable. You'd have your two positions, x and y, and you go, this is a simulated ball inside a little drum. And what we're going to do is kick this ball really hard, and it will start spinning, and friction will slow it. And so your position, it's like simulating a physics model of something on a tether, a ball on a tether. And it looks as if well, let's find out. This is exactly what I was going to try to do with this, is model this. So we've got orbit y equals 0, orbit x equals 0. Speed is being incremented. I don't necessarily need to worry about that right at the moment. Position is the position of our angle. So rather than having input sample equals sine position, I'm going to reverse those just to make the point. The idea is that I'm doing the inverse of those things. So rather than directly reading off of the sine function, we're taking a variable and we are incrementing and decrementing it. It's starting out as 0, which is maybe not what we're going to want, but it might be okay, we'll see. And then input sample equals, because if we could make this work, we can do other things with it as well, such as have orbit x and orbit y pick up friction, have the speed at which they're going alter, or have them converge to 0, which is what we're eventually going to want. So right now what we want to do, and we may never use orbit y, but it would be present in the simulation of the ball spinning around in a circle. So it may possibly end up useful. Position starts at 0. And let's just build this and see what it does now, because I've just changed it in a significant way, and we're going to see what happens. We may render this and then look at the output rather than listen to it right away, because it could very well go off in a DC offset or something. So here's what we're going to do. We're also going to isolate a little chunk of audio and make a new document, because I'm tired of having there be two instances of this, but my monitoring is only in mono today. That's because I'm running the outputs into the HDMI, but I don't know why the HDMI is only coming across in mono, so it's something to worry about in some future video stream. Right now I'm not doing a mono stereo plugin, so it doesn't matter. And let's save this as something. We'll call it drum kit mono. And here we go. And now that we have this, what do we get? If we tell it to be orbit kick, and we're not actually changing, we're not changing the speed of it at all. What happens if we apply this and look at the output? Well, we were all dry, so it doesn't do anything. What happens if we put it to all wet and look at the output? We would get this. Well, that's funny. It's much louder. Much louder than we need. And it's doing something, but it's a little hard to tell what, and then it kind of just stops and becomes silent after that point. So first order of business is slider 2 can become gain. Now we can do this and scale up and down the amount of additional energy being put in, because that was far too loud. It will happen for both of these simultaneously. And we'll set slider 2 to something very low. For that matter, let's do it over again and include speed. We'll see what we get. First thing we try is without including speed, though. Should wave, open, or where did we even hide that one? I swear it was somewhere. Drum kit. That should be drum kit mono. Oh well. Now I'll be able to load it anyhow. Let us resave that. I had to quit using drugs and drinking a long time ago, so I'm not doing a drunken mono. That's just silliness. And we can reload that up again. And this time, you should probably remember, let's see if it does, open recent, there we go. And now we can get back to fooling with the plugin. So with gain at 0, it's not going to drop back in speed. This is the overall gain of the end result, and if we apply and close, since we want to see whether it does something unbearable audio-wise, it kind of is. Look at that. It's making a nice little frequency, and it's responding to input waves coming in. Starting with a very low frequency sound, and it seems to be starting at like literally full crank. So this bit is weird. That's not good. And then we're getting a note. And then as we go, we're starting to get probably higher and higher pitches. But we're getting a drift. It's drifting right down. Even as it sort of fades away, we have a massive DC offset that is built up. We don't like or want that. But before we debug it, and we're not attempting to listen to this because it's going to hurt people's speakers and things, we're going to watch what it does a second time, but this time with a decay. Oh yeah, that's not a happy picture. Although I will say this, it appears like it is attenuating down to nothingness unless it's not. That looks kind of suspiciously like everything is distorted to crap the entire time. Not awesome. And here's more sine waves going wildly out of control. Let's undo that one more time and see if we can scale the whole thing using the controls we've built into this. Second is our scale for the amount of everything we're doing. If we take it down to the smallest possible number, what do we get? Madness, still. But we're kind of seeing more of what's happening. And one of the things that we're seeing is our DC offset is terrible. It's drifting all over the place. In fact, it's drifting up and down. It's like going back and forth through everything. But we are seeing frequencies that start off at a high frequency and then decay lower. One of the things that's happening, and this is important, is since we're using this output to increment a variable that's doing the same thing that you get with random walk algorithms, where if you take a variable and you're just adding a random number to it, in theory, it will average out to 0 if it's perfectly random. But what will really happen is the randomness will just wander in a direction and keep wandering. And you'll get something that looks like this. It's almost always going to be massive DC offset. So what we're going to do to even be able to hear this at all is start working with how to take these super low frequencies, because it is decaying down to super low frequencies. The low frequencies get louder as they go. So what we're going to do is update this orbit X and orbit Y. And one of the things that we can do with them is attenuate them. That's going to be a form of, like, if orbit X or orbit Y are swinging through 0, that's part of a waveform. The speed that it's going matters. But if we take that, like, ideally what we're going to want to do is have it represented as a speed so here's an interesting thought. Can we so if orbit X is being incremented by something, that is also where it should be attenuated, and it should not be getting attenuated. Bear with me as I solve this. Friction equals get param 3. Let's make it be the same calculation as increment. So it's going to be basically 1. But do I want that? I don't know if I do. So let's not, but we're still having it be scaled way down using the power function. It is at least centering around 0 fairly well, but then it should, because I do have positives and negatives affecting things. Still, I have some more coffee, that might help. So, and similarly for orbit Y, not that we're using it, but in theory this would be the same thing that you could use for a video game and drawing a thing spinning around in a circle, so I'm leaving that there just cause, cosine. What I don't know is whether or not I should be having this, so here's the thing. Like, I'm trying to make a sort of speed factor in here, but the variables that I'm working with aren't exactly working with the speed factor. They're just giving me raw outputs of a sine and cosine algorithm. Oh. Yeah, well, bear in mind, Mel, I'm kind of out of the way. That said, I think you might have been the person I talked to that, are you the fellow who wanted mastering? And I was like, well, I've mixed for people, but you have to physically visit. So I don't know, but yeah, if that's you, talk to me. I've done 2 albums for Wursiki, and that is certainly something that I can do. I'm charging like $40 an hour per person. Actually, I think I was going to have it be $20 per person, but I count as one of the people. So a single person visiting me to do mixing would be paying $40 an hour for mixing in the studio with your stuff and working with all of this. And yeah, also you'd have to stay somewhere. That's, anyway, probably not a concern for today. Today we're trying to make a plugin. Everybody can have the plugins. It's much simpler. So orbit x plus equals or minus equals is what is causing our stuff to move. Orbit x times equals something that's always going to be positive, but is going to go from 1 to much smaller. Let's put some more parentheses in here just so that I make sure that it's done right. That's not a parenthesis, that's a 9. Because I definitely want to be minus the cosine or sine times friction, meaning 1 minus potentially a very small amount. All right, well, always talk to me about that. There's not many people that are good for randomly visiting me, and anybody who is, like, lives somewhere, so definitely don't show up at my doorstep being like, I live here now. That ain't happening. But, yeah. And if I'm not getting, I'll check and see whether I'm getting emails from you, because that's a prerequisite towards being able to talk about anything like that. I swear I really enjoyed doing the mixing for Wojcicki. So it's certainly a thing. It's just a question of practicalities. Anyways, what we're doing right now is this thing. And this should have been bringing stuff back to zero fairly forcefully. Let's see what we've got. Remembering that what we've got is two variables, so you could trace the outputs of this. You could have one of them be left and the other be right. Trace those on a graph and it would be making circles. That's the idea from OrbitKeg, is to be able to do stuff that would simulate that and work with the simulation in an interesting way. What have we got? Have we got something where we can start actually listening to the output again? Because that'd be cool. It's no listening because our outputs are too out of control. What do we got? Okay, that's still wandering around too much. Friction was what, 3? 2? 3. So we've got that really dialed back. It's going through power functions. However, if we cranked it way up, we would have pretty much silence. So let's split the difference. We have it at about 0.5. What do we get? Something. And now that we have that going on, let's fool with the gain a little bit. So we've got the gain padded way down. What would we have if we did this? That's actually the same. I don't think that's actually gain, that's just labeled that way. This is speed. So what we're going to want is, this might remain down here, but this could be a lot louder. Oh, far too loud. Let's not do that. But it's looking very much like I will be able to start fooling with it. Ah. We got something. So there's a thing. We're sure not able to make the lowest notes go down to nothing. That's for damn sure. Let's see what else we can do before we get into heavy listening on this. So back to our code. Increment is parameter 1, gain is parameter 2, so gain we're just scaling everything. Friction is parameter 3. That's how hard we're pulling stuff back to 0 again. We are getting a result, but we wanted to shut the heck up when we don't have a large input forcing it into stuff. So our first is more like pitch. We might be able to bring that into the calculation too, but let's crank our pitch way up for the time being and see what we get as a result of that. Looks like nothing good. Oh, what the heck. Let's listen to it while we fool around with it. It doesn't seem to be making noises too loud, so and we can quiet it down nicely. There we go. We got something going on here. It goes goes the other direction to get high pitches. So what's happening here is this is decaying relative to the pitch. Like it's decaying just as hard. It's decaying just as hard with the high pitch as it is with the low pitch. What I was looking for is something that would allow the high pitches to be more like sines rather than just wave-shaped, and then the low pitches to be attenuated down to nothing. So what can we do? We can bring speed into it, because like this is essentially us kludging a desired outcome. I want to make it act like it is a physically modeled sine, where as you slow down, it's no longer pinned to the inside of the drum, and then it decays into the center as it slows right down. We don't have that right now. In fact, I think one thing that might be worth doing is let's invert that. And then look at what we get. We're reversing those functions, so instead we're doing the opposite, and I want to see what that does, if anything. And we're not going to listen, because it'll be loud. Okay, this is literally not what we want. It's a whole different wave shaping. It's giving me essentially triangle waves. That's interesting. We're able to kick in new outputs, and then again we have these massive spikes, but it is attenuating the wrong place. Like if this is meant to be a sine wave, what's happening is it's getting pulled to the center harder as we it's producing an effect. Like this is definitely a thing. It's just definitely not what we want. Here, let's undo this and then do that again, scale it back, and I'll show you the full size of the waveform. 0.11 to 0.2. See, this is how crazy it gets. We don't want this as the output of our audio. Way to rental after. Yeah, it is not actually a city. Man, talk to me. That's it. This is, you have a very large project in mind. That's an intense thing. Anywho, because remember, I have to still be able to work as Airwindows. I can't stop doing the plugins and my own researches for half a year to do somebody's album. That is not how it was for Wojcicki. Wojcicki was a matter of like a couple of times a week for the course of a month or so, you know. So bear that in mind. Hey, Fulcomas. And remember, if you are trying to monitor weight, you can do that through using monitoring or subs only, and switching to subs, because what that will do is it will run everything, balance all the lows out so that they are louder, but then also distort them quite heavily, so you can hear what's happening in the subsonics by the way it's clipping the output. It makes it more audible. But what we've got here is literally not what you want, because look at this. Like, we have ridiculous spikes popping up. And then over here we have a spike that is so extreme that it's literally clipping even though we stepped it down that much. Whereas if we go back to what we had before, and go back to this and use the same settings, all I've done is I've changed cosine for sine and vice versa. And we're still not going to listen to it, but it will have the same settings as I had. That becomes this. Rather than getting super loud, it becomes super clipped, it becomes super distorted because the algorithm is so effective at what it's doing. But what we want is when it gets really slow like this, it forces the results down to next to nothing. But the higher pitched ones get to bloom outwards a little bit more and be more of a sine wave. I'm trying to have a centering factor because if I take this away completely, what we get is a, in fact, can I do that with this example? I think I probably can. So right, we got this. And then 3 is friction. If friction is 0, it's times 1 minus that. So if I apply that, now it wanders around because nothing is being returned to 0 anymore. I want the zeroing force, but I don't want it to apply to higher frequencies. I want it to apply to lower frequencies more. Hey, I'm glad you like Baxandall too. I enjoy doing that one. So let's get out of here again. But I'm thinking what we're going to do is have this be a factor of speed. Like speed, so increment, an increment is, so it's going to be smaller. When speed is extremely low, the frequency is low, it's next to nothing, it's close to 0. When speed is extremely high, it might be closer to 1. It's not likely to be more than 1. So we can continue enhancing this stuff. Like friction is how we're slowing and centering things. So let's look into here. Let's assume this is the thing we want to change. Can't seem to do that right. This is what's making it be centered. And it's going to be this stuff. So this is what makes it be the right kind of distortion. I think that's how that's supposed to work. We're certainly able to do it the opposite way. So having it be less effective at high speeds and more effective at low speeds. Speed's going to decrease to nothing. now what we have is friction is most effective at no speed, but as speed cranks up, it becomes less effective. Let's see what this does. Because I think speed is not going to get that close to 1, but it also decays fairly slowly. So we're affecting this result. Just having a look at chat for a moment. And run twisted wave. We're probably dialing in towards the end of the day. Oh, that coffee is gone. Next gone. But we've at least got something happening. And let's continue to explore it. So, full wet. Okay, where'd that go? There it is. Let's see what we've got. Oh, hello. Okay. Interesting. So we have a proper wave shaping thing going on here. This is not really what was intended. It's something, but it's not what was intended. And it's making stuff become louder as the frequency drops. Let's play with that some more. If we have much lower frequency notes, oh yeah, you see, this is what we are trying to avoid. We do not like this. We do not like as the frequency drops, it drops to where you have full DC offset at maximum. I want the full output to sit near the center rather than over here. Like this is making bass waves, but if you like had silence, it would. I can demonstrate that. Now check out what it does. Same thing. See, this is literally what we don't want. That is exactly the opposite of what we want, is when it goes to silence, it goes to a massive DC offset and stays there. That's terrible. Empty pictures is from a while back and moving forward. We're not keeping empty pictures. So what's going on here is literally the opposite of what I want. Why? Could it be because my use of the... What would happen if I was doing it opposite again? We'll find out. Run this with the same settings there were before. Oh, let's not listen to that. Oh, yikes. We have a giant, yeah, we still have the thing where as we are at higher frequencies, it is in fact giving me my sine. I wanted it to do this. I like this. It's centering harder when we get here. but then as the frequency drops, it starts being more wandering. That I do not like at all. Nor do I understand why it is doing that thing. So let's do a little trick. We're no longer even checking position for this. I want to see what this does. Oh, one of the things it does is break. Let's not have it break. And I see why it broke. There, now it should be fine. So we had this thing where it was really exaggeratedly applying that sine function to its gravity, and that didn't make any sense. It didn't work. I inverted it and it did an equally wrong thing, so now we are skipping that completely and keeping some of our other factors going. And then if we apply this and look at the output, so that's not necessarily great, but that's kind of interesting. And boy, do we have a bunch of energy coming in when the highs are there. We have a centering factor when we are hitting high frequency sounds. It kicks all the harder. Two-part repercussion. I do not know why that would be happening in Reaper versus other DAWs. I'm currently using Reaper, but the stuff that you're talking about, I'm not necessarily using. So I do not know. I do not know the answer to that question. If I did, it would not be happening. I'm not seeing anything like that happen myself. So this is kind of what I was after. I wanted it to have that centering force. For that matter, let's do another test. So we've got something which is starting to behave itself a little bit, but not. Like our high frequency stuff, as defined for instance here, we're getting a sound that looks like a waveform. Unfortunately, as the frequency drops further, it's able to stay centered, but boy, it's not scaling very well. Like, it's keeping everything within a neat little gain factor regardless, but it's not going to deal with subs properly. Like, I can crank this as high as I want, and all it's going to do, let's do that again and crank the gain. Is same deal. It's able to handle high frequencies hitting, but as the lows come along, look at there. It's dropping to DC and it's not centering any more than it does for the highs. So what we need to do is add a nonlinearity here. We're trying to make it so that the deep bass stuff, or the DC, converges to zero really forcefully, but the higher frequency stuff right down to the extreme lows acts like sines, doesn't have that kind of attenuation at all. And the way that that works is what's going to make this concept operate. One thing about it, I think that maybe the fab stuff, this may or may not be relevant, but we are at least figuring some of this out. So the way speed interacts with friction is linear. It needs to be nonlinear. It needs to be like just about nothing a lot of the time. So let's make a local variable. That's going to act kind of crazy, but it will do something. So what's happening here is we are multiplying speed by itself. So speed is always typically going to be less than 1 unless the input is literally distorting. It's going to be larger than 0 because it only gets boosted if input sample is larger than ed. Input sample is going to be between 0 and 1. We can also same thing. And then we're increasing it a huge amount, and I'll tell you why that is. Because I want to clamp it. Although, so here's a funny thought. Let's use sines again, but in a weirder way. That can be built into the other algorithm if it turns out that's handy. So what we're doing here is now we have it, and let us use another control. Just for the hell of it, we'll call it this, and we will call it times 10. Now what that's going to do is that is how we apply this amount. Actually, it's kind of tacky. Let's call it something else. All the furries in the audience are like, oh. Envelope. Because what's happening is I'm going to make it so that it has most effectiveness at a medium state and then falls back off, and I'll be able to shape where that applies. It will go from a maximum of 1 from nothing down to nothing again, because I am applying it yeah, Little Davis, I'm doing a kick drum. If I have any success, I'll at least be able to show you. We're probably getting towards the end of the stream, but I'm going to, as always, I'm running into 3 hours or so. I'd rather have it stick to more like 2, so we're not going to go too much longer, but I'm starting to get some results, and that's always exciting. So yeet, and yeet. So now I got a factor called apply speed. Speed goes from 0 to something that's not all the way to 1, typically. And pow speed, comma 2 means it's going to fall off a lot faster. It'll go towards 0 much quicker. Times envelope means I can also ramp it up so that it boosts out a lot. Sign means the result of that is always going to end up being between -1 and 1. And fabs means it's going to be between 1 and 1. 0 and 1, sorry. So we have a major change in how this operates. And that all has to do with how we apply this friction thing, which is supposed to slow down the scale of how this enters in. It's a little complicated, I apologize, but and let's see, what do we need here? We need this. That should do it. Now that we have this, what do we have? If we take these same settings and just apply it, we have a good loud result. But one of the things that's happening, interestingly, is we're doing that inverse thing again. Maybe that's not desirable. So let's quickly bail out of here, put it back, because one of our experiments was, come on, stop that. To apply this as 1, and one of the experiments was to apply it as sine, and one of the experiments was to apply it as cosine. The one that I just demonstrated was one of the weirder experiments that made things become sort of spiky waveforms, and I don't want that. That's not the purpose of this. So let's see what we get when we apply it in sines. And we've got something where, yeah, no matter what I do, it's doing this wave shaping thing. That is not at all what I want, so let's bail out of this again. Let's back that out entirely and see what we've got. It should be able to take over at some point. Like, I know exactly what I'm trying to make happen, it's just hard to put it into words. Lifeline, I'm glad you enjoy the calm atmosphere here. I've got my little studio, I'm making plugins. Sometimes I get a little bit frustrated with making the plugins work, but you know, I've got my wood stove going. I probably should throw another log on there at some point. And we're about to try what I just changed. So you're basically hanging out. I do see chat at least some of the time. I can't always help with the chat, but I can do my level best. And here we are with Orbit Kick again. Now what I want to see out of this is a thing where I have sine-like waveforms being produced by this algorithm. And they drop in pitch as it goes. And as they drop in pitch, they reach this point. Ooh, and I think I needed to use this for something, so let's bring this up. So that's interesting. What have we here? We got some kind of crazy result there. But it looks like it's trying to do the thing. Let's explore more. If this is a very small amount, what happens? I get no effect. If this is much less, and this is a little bit more, what happens? Ooh, it gets too loud and it blows up. Don't want that. Although it could almost be working like that. It's a big waveform. Let's explore that a little bit more. And again, I'm watching these rather than listening to them because they'll make a horrible noise. And it'd be very painful to hear. So third would be my gain. I could label these, but... And what the hell was second? Let's not care. Let's get third down to a place where it's making tolerable noises. This is still far too loud. It'll blow you up if I run this through the speaker, so I'm going to avoid it. Was that even the right thing? No, friction is param 3. I need to turn down param 2. I should be changing my labeling. Let's do that right now. Then the next time I fool with it, I'll at least know what's happening. Increment gain friction envelope. See, the thing with this sort of stuff is that if I can get a really great result, that's basically enough. I can just start using it. I have to test it at different speeds and stuff like that, but the gist of it is if I can make it do the right thing, low passing noise and stirs and claps and don't know. Yep, just glancing at, just looking at chat. iOS Live Guide Chanel number 5. Let's get back into opening up a audio file and fussing with this until it's something that I can listen to while moving the controls. Gain, you should be smaller. Now what have we got? That's still too big. Let's have friction be a little bit larger. Still too loud. Do I still have happening what I think is happening? Probably. I think that succeeded in making the gain be 0. If it did not make it be 0, I would know something was really wrong. Now, 0.002. Oh god, okay, we have really loud output now. And our levels here are really unmanageable. What about going to half as loud as that? 0.001. More friction. Oh, okay, now it's bouncing back to Tinyville again. A little bit less than that. Okay, well that's quiet enough that I can fool with the results. We're going to live dangerously. We can actually hear the output of this now. We're going to hit play. So what we have here, we seem to be enhancing the deepest lows. As we crank it up, we're starting to hear the highs a little bit more. Actually, you know what? I can use option in. Back to the lows again. Okay, we're hearing something. I don't think it's doing what I needed, but interesting. So what I'm hearing, although rather quietly, is here's the thing though, I can see on the output that it's not giving me silence. Yeah, this is how fast it dies off. This is how intensely I can cut it back. And that little click there shows you that we had extremely deep sub-bass content at literally all times. It showed on the meter as well. We're still trying to avoid doing this. We're still trying to make it go away. Here, Lifeline, the thing is, I'm trying to make the algorithm not need a high pass. So more needs to be revealed as far as that's concerned. Like Orbit X doing it this way is not working. Here's a possibility. And we got all our happy parentheses that no longer matter. What that is we're always going to cut back based on apply speed. If it becomes enormous, Well, hang on though. We don't want the sign factor in there though. So let's make this even simpler. So, and we can't have speed be 0 if it's like this. So speed attenuates down to next to nothing. Tell you what, let's just do this. Speed is going to try to be a higher number and then get smaller. It will tend to fade to 0. That is what we're looking for. So we're no longer using friction for anything. And envelope can go to a really high number. So now what we've got is speed is the pitch of what's going on. And then what this is going to do is, if it's a very small number, eventually you get to where it's attenuating and it will tail off to 0 as it fades down to nothing. If it is a smaller number, it will become enormous and apply speed will be here's what we're going to do. We don't really need to be doing this in orbit Y, but might be able to find a way to fit it in somehow. One more little thing. We only want to do this if it is, in fact, less than 1, if it's attenuating. If it's going to amplify, then we don't want any. This should at least do something. Let's find out what we got. It's simple. That was good. We'll see whether it's centering things very well, because the attenuation is dividing, and so it's going to tend towards 0. What do we get? Oh, hello, that's interesting. We got a high frequency thing. It starts out and it gets littler, and then boom, it goes to 0 when it drops below a certain point, but our center is still tending to be very offset. That's kind of special. Let's quickly see if we can make that not be a thing. So we can 0 it pretty good. Let's use friction for something anyhow. So that is now doing another kind of attenuation. We're going to see where that got, and our end result is we wanted to have those signs going lower in frequency and blooming outwards, but then decaying to silence afterwards. That's what we've not been getting, so we're going to try to get it. And again, I'm trying like hell to make this algorithm do what I want it to do without formally high-passing it. I want it to decay in such a way that the big sine wave oscillations will converge down to 0, even though they get bigger as they get lower, and that causes the low frequencies to be louder, which is generally what you want, but... So let's see. What have we got? Oh, interesting. Okay. Feels like it's kind of on the right track. We might even be able to hear the result. Friction's definitely doing its job. If envelope is smaller, it will attenuate more. Okay, that's funky. Didn't expect that. I believe that means friction is not large enough. But this is kind of what we were looking to see. And then it's definitely going to a place where it kind of cuts right off. Now, one of the things that we're doing is we are applying the speed decay. It's just going exponential, so it will cut things off to silence after a certain point. We're formally defining that point. I'm going to try one more thing and see whether I can get into a place where I'm willing to have it be audible again. Let's increase friction a little bit more. And then I think a little bit more than that. That's really weird, but I kind of want to hear what it does. Want to hear this? It's a little DC-ish, but not super DC-ish. It's doing something. Here's our highest frequencies. They do tend to be fairly centered. We are able to return to the center, so we don't have massive DC offsets. What does this sound like? Sounds like this. Funky. Gain. Let's make it louder. See, if we have it be high frequencies, then it definitely so I think we're getting pretty good signs there. It sounds like to me. It's cutting off a little fast, but I think I know why, and I think I can fix it. In fact, I can define this in such a way that it cuts off at a frequency. That's probably desirable. So let's quit out of here, leaving that the way it is. Speed times envelope A. Envelope is giving me my total scaling, and I do need to make it be fairly high, but what if we, instead of doing speed, see, speed gets larger as the waveform gets bigger. Or, hang on, or does it? Increment is what's causing this to be its thing. So speed is getting larger as the, oh, no, hang on. So it all kind of works. Let's, random experiments. Got to have the random experiments. Does this do what I want, or does this do the opposite of what I want? Square root of speed. If it does the opposite of what I want, the answer is very simple. I'll square it. But instead, we're going to see what happens there. Kit mono. This was doing a thing, and we're going to look at the output just in case it goes crazy. Oop. Well, that's a long decay. That's a very long decay. That's far too low a frequency. So, if we cranked envelope up, do we get to where it can cut off, or can it not even cut off? That kind of really didn't seem to do anything, did it? So let's do the opposite. Envelope can be tiny. Well, that does get to a point where it does cut off eventually. Now, if I make envelope even smaller, does this cut off faster? Yes. That's a decay. So now that we've got that going on, I'm willing to listen to it because it's not too out of control. So it's definitely going swoop. Can't say as I'm that thrilled with the some of this grind here is that I'm triggering it with a drum kit. And it's being triggered by high frequency sounds, not just deep bass. But we got something. Okay, we're clipping. Well, hang on, these are going to the same place, so what happens if we have them be the same value? Stop, let's try this. Friction and envelope should be the same thing. They're very different parameters, but they should be the same thing. And let's see what we get out of that. Oh, gotta quit out of this first. And let's see. Open this up again. And orbit kick. Envelope no longer does anything. So now we got this being the sort of frequency range here. Definitely there's a little grunginess going on, but you know, I can do something about that with a threshold control. Parameter kparam 4. See you later, Mel. Anybody who is heading out, see you later, folks. Now, final trick before turning it over for the evening and heading off. I've been going for 2.5 hours, and this is not nothing. This is a weird pile of stuff, but all things considered, we got interesting results. You know where the parentheses are, you can type this. And that, which is what 2 ampersands means, is and. So now input sample has to be both larger than speed and threshold to trigger, and it will be triggered by whatever that ends up being, but now we're gating it. Hey, you're welcome to visit anytime you like, Leftline. And let's first so we got the things labeled with some degree of sanity. This is far from being done, but maybe I'll work on it some more next week. And build. Components. And we gotta launch the program. That's what we need to do. And here we are. We were intending to make a kick drum. We got something that sounds kind of like a kick drum. Might not be the most normal kick drum in the world, but hey, this is the thing. We can have this be a plugin and it will automatically go into the VC Rack thing. So if you want to feed whatever into your VCB Rack and have a more organic sine-based kick that you would have than you didn't have before, and let's tune this in an interesting way. So that's a weird sounding lows. It's a nice click to it, but then it goes down to a very low frequency. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, we got sort of weird little squelches. They seem to be mostly, I think I could be using friction more on this. That said, that was kind of cool. And this determines how high a frequency we get. We got some kind of a kick. I'm not sure if I'm happy about all of the details in it. In particular, the pitch that it uses seems to be a pretty linear pitch, and I do not like linear pitches on kicks. Maybe I can fix that quickly. So speed would be slowing. It would be slowing by increment. Increment is something that we've built right in here. What does speed start out as? It could be close to 1. We can make it be such a high value anyhow that this should ramp it very differently. And we're going to see what we just got. Do we now have a kick that has more of an exponential decay, as I often like to have, rather than just a linear because there's some synthetic kicks that I like and some that I do not like so much. Firstly, quick visual check, see if it blew up. Well, that doesn't help because we still had some dry in there. But it didn't do anything crazy, so let's just hear it. Okay, well, it didn't like that, whatever that was. We're able to cut off, but it is, shall we say, not a happy camper. Let's see what it's doing. What does it look like? It looks like a giant mess is what it looks like. So that idea did not work. Back to what we had. And what are we trying to do here? Oh no, the noise component will come from something else. And yeah, what I just did broke everything, so we're not going to do that. And let's try this. We'll double multiply it. Let's see what we got and whether our controls are within the range of being able to do anything with it. Okay, very small. Okay, that was not useful. Envelope should be down to here. Hello. Okay. We got something going on. What it is a question. It looks like a sine wave, though. Let's see what we made. Okay. Not so bad. Well, not that much better, though. This is acting a little bit like an electronic kick. The pitch drop is always very important to me. And if we have a really fast decay, it does click on the output. Doesn't like the decay of that very much. All in all, an interesting place to be experimenting with. If we look at the result of this, we can see that although it does extend outwards vigorously, it does cut off maybe a bit of a thump. It could be cutting off more gently than this. This is still not a very good way of having it cut off. But we are at least having it handle the increase in amplitude as the frequency drops, which makes it be a heavy kick rather than just having it be a straight sine or triangle wave or whatever dropping in pitch, meaning that the front of it is going to be much brighter. This has more weight to it, but it's not cutting off very well. Square root of speed was basically the correct thing. And that's because as speed gets down to smaller, the square root of a tiny, tiny number is much larger than that. So if I was doing the cube root, and then apply speed is that, and envelope is that. What that makes is I'm trying to get something that kicks in more slowly. The input signal is literally a drum track. Here, I'll show that to you in a moment. We're going from square root to cube root because we're trying to get a more gentle transition that still ends up being a full silence once it gets down to nothing. So, and it's not impossible that that got me there by the nature of the math and how that works. And this is the source. The input signal is literally the recording of the drum kit. You could also have it be a envelope, a trigger, a CV, anything like that. That would also work just fine. The input signal is literally a drum kit. And you could also have it be a kick drum mic. And then this would be your like sub reinforcement thingy. But firstly, let's see what we got. Envelope needs to be higher. Interesting. Now, one thing we don't have is a way to scale the onset so that it's not starting at such a high frequency. That is possible, though. Now that we've got a really busy, freaky thing happening, and we should be at low frequencies. Let's see whether the tail end of these low frequencies looks overly sharp or whether it looks like a nice little decay. Ooh, some of those are very one-sided. I need more friction in here. But I don't know. This is pretty chaotic, but it's behaving itself most of the time. If I wasn't making it so exaggerated, the envelope is a little smaller. That's a weird kick. What do we got here? Very one-sided again. Yeah, so I think what I need to do is split this back out again. Threshold becomes parameter 5. Envelope becomes parameter 4 again. So I can do them separately, because that bed ain't working. And I'm going to try to simple scaling factor here. Onset frequency. Some of this stuff will end up being like magic numbers built into it, and some of it will be on controls. As designing things, the reason I have all of these sitting there waiting to be used is so that I can fiddle with many different internal parameters all at the same time. So let's see, what did I have here? Main friction envelope threshold. See, what's going to happen is I can control the way that works. And you know something? All of my decay settings are so tiny I can adjust the range of that, I think. Hide some of these. Okay, 1 minus power get param 1 power over 3, but it's still so very tiny that if I scaled this whole thing, such as we're going to do right now. So what's happening there is we are still doing the initial thing with a taper to it, but all of our controls had to be really tiny, so what we're just doing is making everything be scaled down to be tiny. 1.0 minus a very tiny amount. That's how we start. And we've got our envelope and threshold and onset frequency. And yeah, friction absolutely needs to be able to be larger than that because that was our centering force and we needed it to be much bigger. So when we're really getting to the end here, I am going to stop at 2. So the danger of getting into this kind of thing is my stamina is longer than any possible viewer, and so I will continue grinding away at this. And it's not necessarily always in the interests of a stream to lapse into hyper focus and grinding away on the thing. So let's see now. And I think I had it at time, so let's find out. Oh, interesting. Now, onset frequency should work like this. If I make it smaller, we start at a lower frequency, and that's what I wanted. Gain is going to continue to be pretty much where it is. Stamina training inspiration. Maybe. Now I believe friction is going to tend to affect the wave shape. So I feel like friction might be altering it away from being a sine. Friction is also the bloom of the extreme low frequencies. See, now we're doing massive lows, so we got to stop that. That's just scaling the overall amount. But this is setting the low frequency that we cut off at. And that is a super deep kick that is reinforcing the drum kit. And also the snare. If you put this on a kick drum mic, you'd have something going on. Let's take this way down and bring gain up. And see whether this is very one-sided or not. What does this look like? Oh, okay. Now we're starting to look a lot better. Look at that. Look at that. That's where we're at as far as a low frequency kick. We use enough of that centering force. And oh, we even have some interesting wave shaping on the onsets. That's how it's done. The cutoffs are definitely a little bit sharp, but you know, that's probably fine. Electronic kicks, gents, out of the acoustic sound. It's a nice little tax. This is dub techno waiting to happen. Yup. We're going to have an orbit kick. It's going to work. I turned up friction, which is what made stuff get much more centered. Oh, now we're just distorting. Sorry, guys. That was loud. Here where it drops into the subs and stops. And then we can make it stop going into the subs at all. See, and that's a little, it's still bassy, but it's cutting off a lot quicker. Here we have a higher pitched one, an onset frequency. You get a lot of weird switchiness going on too. This gets to be a very funky, strange little beast. That's a punchy kick. And it looks like this. Here's your fierce little electronic kick. And we have enough of an onset there. Yeah, right around 2 o'clock, I feel like we have a working kick drum plug-in. And it should work on CV trigger inputs as well. Should work on whatever you put into it. And yeah, should be fun. I have some tuning to do, and I might be doing that next week because I might need to put out some other plugins before this comes out. For instance, I was demonstrating stuff using Console 8 Lite, and that might be desirable. But yeah, hopefully this will do a good thing. So so on that note, I will bid you good night, because I call that a pretty successful result. Kicks in space. Laters.